The morning frost painted delicate patterns across the windows of Anmer Hall as Catherine stirred beneath the warm duvet. The Norfolk countryside lay silent under a blanket of winter's grip, and she could hear the gentle breathing of William beside her. It was Sunday, and today held special significance. Not just because of the weekly church service at St. Mary Magdalene, but because King Charles had specifically requested their presence alongside him at Sandringham. Catherine's eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the pale light filtering through the curtains. The digital clock on her nightstand read 6:30 a.m., giving her plenty of time before they needed to leave for the 11 a.m. service. She turned carefully, not wanting to wake William, and studied his peaceful face in the morning light. Even in sleep, there was a strength about him that had drawn her to him all those years ago at university. Now, as the Prince of Wales, that strength had evolved into something deeper, a quiet determination to serve his people and support his father during these challenging times. The past few months had been particularly difficult for the royal family. King Charles's health concerns had cast a shadow over the monarchy, though he had faced each challenge with the dignity and grace that had defined his character throughout his life. William had stepped up significantly, taking on additional responsibilities while maintaining his own demanding schedule of royal duties. Catherine watched as the weight of these responsibilities had settled on her husband's shoulders, but she had also witnessed his remarkable resilience. She slipped quietly from bed, her bare feet touching the cold hardwood floor. The chill sent a shiver up her spine, reminding her of just how bitter the January weather had become. Through the bedroom window, she could see the grounds of their Norfolk home covered in a thin layer of snow that had fallen during the night. The bare branches of the ancient oak trees swayed gently in the morning breeze, creating an almost ethereal landscape that never failed to take her breath away. Catherine made her way to the kitchen, the familiar routine of preparing morning tea bringing her comfort. As the kettle heated, she reflected on how much their lives had changed over the years. The young woman who had once been nervous about meeting William's grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, had grown into someone who now provided strength and support not just to her husband, but to the entire institution of the monarchy. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been years of learning, adapting, and finding her own voice within the constraints and expectations of royal life. The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted her thoughts. William appeared in the doorway, his hair tousled from sleep, wearing the comfortable sweater and pajama pants that made him look more like any other father of three than the future King of England. He smiled when he saw her, that genuine smile that had captured her heart years ago and continued to warm her every single day. "Good morning," he said softly, crossing to kiss her forehead. "You're up early. I wanted to have everything ready," Catherine replied, pouring hot water over the tea bags. "I know today is important to your father." William nodded, accepting the steaming mug she offered him. They stood together in comfortable silence, looking out at the winter landscape. Both understood the significance of their appearance at church today. It wasn't just about fulfilling their religious obligations or maintaining royal tradition. It was about showing unity, strength, and continuity during uncertain times. The public would be watching, the media would be analyzing every gesture and expression, and their presence would send a message about the stability of the monarchy. "How are you feeling about everything?" Catherine asked gently, knowing that William often carried the burden of his responsibilities quietly. "Anxious," he admitted, a rare moment of vulnerability that he shared only with her. Not about the service itself, but about Papa. He's been pushing himself so hard lately, insisting on maintaining his full schedule despite everything. I worry that he's not taking enough time to rest. Catherine set down her tea and moved closer to him, placing her hand on his arm. "Your father is one of the strongest people I know. He's faced adversity before and come through it with grace. And he's not facing this alone. He has you, he has us, and he has the support of the entire family." "I know," William sighed. "It's just difficult sometimes, watching someone you love struggle and feeling like there's so little you can do to help. But You are helping, Catherine insisted. Every time you take on an extra engagement, every time you represent him in an event, every time you simply stand beside him, you're helping. And today, when we walk into that church together, we'll be showing everyone that the royal family is united and strong. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of children's voices from upstairs. George, Charlotte, and Louis were waking up, and soon the peaceful morning would transform into the organized chaos that defined their family life. Catherine smiled at the familiar sounds. Despite all the formality and protocol that surrounded their public life, moments like these reminded her that they were, at their core, simply a family. "Shall I go get them ready?" William offered, but Catherine shook her head. "Let me. You finish your tea and take a moment to yourself. Once they're up, there won't be another quiet moment until we get home tonight." Catherine climbed the stairs to find 3 excited children bouncing around their rooms. Sunday church services were always events they looked forward to, partly because of the pageantry and tradition, but mostly because they got to spend time with their grandfather. King Charles had always been a devoted grandfather, despite his busy schedule, and the children adored the stories he would tell, and the way he would sneak them extra sweets when he thought no one was looking. "Mummy, is Grandpapa going to tell us another story about the gardens?" Charlotte asked as Catherine helped her choose an appropriate outfit for church. "I'm sure he will, sweetheart," Catherine replied, smoothing down her daughter's hair. "But remember, today might be different. There will be lots of people watching and taking pictures, so we need to be on our best behavior." George, now old enough to understand the complexities of their public life, nodded seriously. "Will there be protesters again?" he asked, referring to a recent event where a small group had gathered outside a venue they were visiting. Catherine felt her heart ache for her eldest son, who was growing up faster than she would have liked, already aware of the controversies and challenges that came with being royal. "There might be," she answered honestly, "but remember what we've talked about. Some people have different opinions, and that's okay. Our job is to be respectful and kind to everyone, even when they might not agree with us." As she helped Louis with his shirt buttons, Catherine's mind wandered to the challenges her children would face as they grew older. The scrutiny would only intensify, the expectations would become heavier, and they would need to find their own ways to balance public duty with personal happiness. She was determined to give them as normal a childhood as possible while preparing them for the responsibilities that lay ahead. Downstairs, William had begun preparing breakfast while listening to the morning news on the radio. The weather forecast predicted temperatures well below freezing, with a chance of more snow later in the day. The reporter was also discussing the upcoming church service, noting that it would be King Charles's first public appearance since his recent health scare, and that all eyes would be on the royal family. Catherine returned to the kitchen with 3 properly dressed children in tow, each of them chattering excitedly about the day ahead. As they sat around the breakfast table, a scene that could have been from any family home across Britain, Catherine felt a profound sense of gratitude for these ordinary moments within their extraordinary life. "Will we see Uncle Harry and Aunt Megan?" Louis asked innocently, causing a brief silence to fall over the table. William and Catherine exchanged a quick glance. The ongoing rift within the royal family was something they had tried to shield their children from, but it was becoming increasingly difficult as the children grew older and more aware of family dynamics. "No, sweetheart," Catherine said gently. "Uncle Harry and Aunt Megan live very far away now, remember? But we'll see lots of other family members today." The conversation moved on to lighter topics as they finished breakfast, but Catherine could see the thoughtful expression on George's face. He was beginning to understand that their family, like all families, had its complications and challenges. She made a mental note to have a more detailed conversation with him later about the importance of family loyalty and forgiveness, even when relationships became difficult. As they prepared to leave for Sandringham, Catherine took a final look in the mirror. She had chosen a navy blue coat dress with elegant pearl accessories, appropriate for church while also showing respect for the solemnity of the occasion. Her hair was styled in a classic chignon, and her makeup was subtle but polished. Every detail had been carefully considered, knowing that photographs from today would be analyzed and discussed for weeks to come. William appeared beside her reflection, straightening his own tie. He wore a dark wool coat over a charcoal suit, looking every inch the future king while still maintaining the approachability that had made him so popular with the public. "Ready?" he asked, and she could hear both confidence and nervousness in his voice. "Ready," Catherine confirmed, reaching for his hand. As they gathered the children and made their way to the waiting car, Catherine felt the familiar flutter of anticipation that came before any public appearance. But today felt different somehow, more significant. Today wasn't just about fulfilling their royal duties. It was about standing together as a family during a time when unity and strength were more important than ever. The drive to Sandringham would give them a few final moments of privacy before stepping into the public eye. Catherine settled back at her seat, watching the Norfolk countryside roll by through the window. The bare fields and frost-covered hedgerows created a stark but beautiful landscape that reminded her why she had fallen in love with this part of England. As they approached the Sandringham estate, Catherine could see the crowds beginning to gather along the route to the church. Despite the bitter cold, hundreds of people had come out to catch a glimpse of the royal family. Many held flowers, some carried signs of support, and all of them radiated the kind of warmth and affection that always moved Catherine deeply. "Look at all those people," Charlotte whispered in wonder, pressing her face to the car window. "They came to see us despite the cold," George observed, showing the mature perspective that sometimes surprised Catherine. "They came because they care about our family and what we represent," William explained to his children. "It's important that we never take that support for granted." Catherine squeezed William's hand as their car turned through the gates of Sandringham. In just a few minutes, they would step out into the cold January air and face the cameras, the crowds, and the expectations that came with being the future king and queen. But for now, they were simply a family united by love and commitment, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead together. The car slowed as they approached the main house, where King Charles would be waiting to join them for the short journey to church. Catherine took a deep breath, centered herself, and prepared to step into her role as the Princess of Wales, knowing that her husband and children were beside her, and that together they would shine despite the cold. The imposing facade of Sandringham House came into view as their car rounded the final curve of the drive. Catherine felt the familiar mixture of awe and belonging that always accompanied visits to the estate that had been the royal family for generations. The red brick Georgian mansion stood majestically against the winter sky, its windows reflecting the pale morning sun. Even in the harsh January weather, there was something timelessly elegant about the house that had served as a private retreat for the royal family for over 150 years. As their vehicle pulled to a stop at the main entrance, Catherine could see King Charles waiting in the doorway, flanked by his protection officers. Despite the recent health concerns that had dominated headlines, he stood tall and dignified, wearing his familiar navy overcoat and looking every inch the monarch he had become. When he spotted the children pressing their faces against the car windows, his stern expression softened into the warm smile that was reserved for his beloved grandchildren. "Grandpapa," Louis called out as soon as the car door opened, scrambling to be the first to reach his grandfather. King Charles caught the 8-year-old in a gentle embrace, his laugh echoing across the courtyard. "My dear boy, you've grown another foot since I last saw you," he said, ruffling Louis's carefully combed hair. Charlotte and George followed close behind, each receiving their own special greeting from their grandfather. Catherine stepped from the car, immediately feeling the bite of the January wind against her face. The temperature had dropped even further since they left Amer Hall, and she could see her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. She pulled her coat tighter around herself while maintaining the poised posture that had become second nature after years of public appearances. "Catherine, my dear," King Charles said warmly, taking both her hands in his. "Thank you for being here today. I know it's not the most comfortable weather for this sort of thing, "We wouldn't miss it," Catherine replied sincerely, noting the slight fatigue in his eyes that others might not notice. "How are you feeling?" "Better each day," he answered with a slight nod that conveyed more than his words. "And much better for having all of you here." William emerged from the car last, immediately moving to stand beside his father. The resemblance between them was striking. The same strong jawline, the same thoughtful eyes, the same bearing that spoke of duty and responsibility. Catherine watched as father and son exchanged a meaningful look, a silent communication that spoke of shared burdens and mutual support. "Shall we head to the church?" King Charles suggested, gesturing toward the waiting cars. "I suspect Reverend Canon Paul Williams is eager to begin, and I imagine our congregation is getting rather cold waiting outside." The short journey to St. Mary Magdalene Church took them along a tree-lined path that Catherine had walked many times before, but never under circumstances quite like these. Through the car windows, she could see the crowds had grown considerably since their arrival at Sandringham. Hundreds of people lined the route, many wrapped in thick coats and scarves, holding flowers and small Union Jack flags despite the bitter cold. "Look at Mrs. Henderson," Charlotte said excitedly, pointing to an elderly woman in the crowd who had become a familiar face at royal events over the years. "She's wearing the same hat as last time." Catherine smiled at her daughter's observation. It was exactly these kinds of personal connections that made their public role meaningful. Mrs. Henderson, like so many others in the crowd, represented the enduring loyalty and affection that the British people held for the royal family. Despite political changes, social upheaval, and generational shifts, there remained a core group of supporters who viewed the monarchy as a symbol of continuity and stability. As they approached the church, Catherine could see the media assembled in their designated area, cameras and microphones ready to capture every moment of their arrival. She had long since learned to tune out the constant clicking of camera shutters and the shouted questions from reporters, but she was always conscious of how every gesture and expression would be analyzed and interpreted in tomorrow's headlines. The Norman Church of St. Mary Magdalene stood like a fortress against the winter landscape, its ancient stone walls having witnessed centuries of royal worship. Catherine knew that Queen Elizabeth II had loved this church particularly, finding solace in its simple dignity and the continuity it represented. Today felt especially poignant, knowing that this would be one of King Charles's first major public appearances since inheriting not just the throne, but the deep personal connection his mother had felt to this place. Their car stopped at the church entrance, where a small group of local dignitaries waited to greet them. Catherine could see the church wardens, the mayor of the local council, and several other officials who had been carefully selected to represent the community. Each wore their finest formal attire despite the freezing temperature, understanding the significance of this moment. King Charles stepped from his car first, immediately engaging with the waiting officials with the practiced ease of someone who had been performing such duties his entire life. Catherine watched him carefully, looking for any signs of fatigue or discomfort, but saw only the consummate professional who had spent decades preparing for exactly these moments. William and the children joined the greeting line, each child shaking hands politely with the adults they were introduced to. George, as the eldest, showed particular maturity in these interactions, already understanding that his role required a certain level of formality even at his young age. Charlotte charmed everyone with her bright smile and confident handshake, while Louis, true to his nature, asked one of the officials about the interesting medal he was wearing. "Your Majesty, Your Royal Highnesses," Reverend Canon Paul Williams approached with a warm smile. "Welcome to St. Mary Magdalene. We are honored to have you worship with us today." Catherine had always appreciated Reverend Williams's approach to their family's attendance at the church. He struck the perfect balance between acknowledging their royal status and treating them as any other parishioners seeking spiritual guidance and community worship. His sermons were thoughtful and relevant, never feeling like performances designed to impress royal attendees. As they prepared to enter the church, Catherine took a moment to look back at the gathered crowd. Despite the bitter cold, more people were still arriving, some having traveled considerable distances for the chance to see the royal family. She could see families with young children, elderly couples supporting each other against the wind, and individuals of all ages who had chosen to spend their Sunday morning standing in freezing weather for a glimpse of this historic moment. "They're remarkable, aren't they?" Williams said quietly, following her gaze. "Absolutely remarkable," Catherine agreed. "I never cease to be amazed by their dedication and support, especially in weather like this." King Charles overheard their conversation and nodded approvingly. "Your grandmother always said that the British people were the most loyal and steadfast in the world." Moments like these prove her absolutely right. The mention of Queen Elizabeth II cast a brief shadow of sadness over the group, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of determination. They were here to honor her memory by continuing the traditions she had held dear, while also forging their own path forward as the monarchy evolved with the times. Inside the church, the atmosphere was warm and welcoming despite the ancient stone walls. The pews were filled with a mixture of regular parishioners and invited guests, all rising as the royal party entered. Catherine always felt moved by this moment, the sense of community worship that transcended social boundaries and brought people together in common purpose. Their usual pew in the front section had been prepared with small cushions for the children, a thoughtful touch that Catherine appreciated. As they settled into their seats, she could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes upon them, but also the genuine warmth and affection radiating from the congregation. King Charles appeared relaxed and engaged as the service began, participating fully in the hymns and readings. Catherine noticed that his voice seemed stronger than it had in recent weeks, and there was a vitality in his manner that suggested the worst of his health concerns might be behind him. She felt William relax beside her as he observed the same things. The children were remarkably well-behaved throughout the service, standing for hymns, sitting quietly during readings, and following along with the order of service. Charlotte whispered occasional questions to Catherine about the meaning of certain passages, while George helped Louis find the right page in his prayer book. These small family moments within the formal setting reminded Catherine of why they worked so hard to give their children as normal a childhood as possible. Reverend Williams's sermon focused on themes of service, community, and resilience in the face of adversity. Though he never made direct reference to the royal family's recent challenges, Catherine felt that his words were particularly relevant to their situation. He spoke about the importance of supporting one another during difficult times and the strength that comes from faith and family bonds. As the service progressed, Catherine found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a young woman studying art history at university to sitting in a royal pew as the Princess of Wales seemed almost impossible to believe. Yet here she was, surrounded by her husband and children, supporting her father-in-law as he navigated the challenges of kingship and finding strength in traditions that had sustained the monarchy for generations. The moment came for the collection, and Catherine watched as King Charles reached into his coat pocket for his contribution. It was a small gesture, but one that spoke to his understanding that even monarchs must participate in the communal aspects of worship. William followed suit, and Catherine made sure the children each had their own small contributions to make. During the final hymn, Catherine noticed that many members of the congregation were watching the royal family with expressions of genuine affection and concern. These weren't tourists or casual observers. They were local people who had known the royal family as neighbors and fellow worshippers for years. Their support felt personal and authentic in a way that formal state occasions sometimes couldn't match. As the service concluded and they prepared to leave, Catherine felt a sense of accomplishment and unity. They had successfully navigated their first major public appearance since King Charles's health scare, presenting a picture of family strength and continuity that would reassure the public and demonstrate the stability of the monarchy. The children were eager to greet the crowds waiting outside, but Catherine reminded them quietly about the importance of maintaining dignity while still being warm and approachable. It was a delicate balance she was still mastering herself, but one that was essential to their public role. King Charles stood at the church entrance, clearly energized by the service and the warm reception from the congregation. "Shall we greet our well-wishers?" he suggested, his eyes twinkling with the anticipation of connecting with the public he served. Catherine straightened her coat and checked that the children were properly arranged beside her and William. In just moments, they would step outside into the bitter cold and face the cameras and crowds that had been waiting patiently throughout the service. But she felt ready, surrounded by her family and strengthened by the spiritual foundation they had just shared together. The heavy wooden doors of St. Mary Magdalene Church swung open, and immediately Catherine felt the full force of the January wind rushing across the Norfolk countryside. The temperature had dropped even further during the hour they had spent inside, and she could see that a light snow had begun to fall, dusting the shoulders of the waiting crowd with delicate white flakes. Despite the harsh conditions, the number of well-wishers had actually grown, with people continuing to arrive even as the weather worsened. King Charles stepped out first, his face lighting up as he saw the dedicated crowd that had waited so patiently in the bitter cold. Catherine watched with admiration as he immediately moved toward the barriers, his natural warmth and genuine interest in people overriding any concern for his own comfort. This was the side of her father-in-law that the public rarely saw in formal settings. The man who could spend hours talking to individual citizens about their lives, their concerns, and their hopes for the future. "Good morning, everyone," King Charles called out, his voice carrying across the churchyard despite the wind. "I do hope you haven't been waiting too long in this dreadful weather." The crowd responded with enthusiastic cheers and calls of "Good morning, Your Majesty." Catherine could see the genuine joy on the faces of the people pressed against the barriers, their devotion to the royal family evident despite their obvious discomfort from the cold. Many held flowers that were already wilting from the frost, but their spirits remained undaunted. William moved to stand beside his father, and Catherine was struck by how naturally they worked together in these public interactions. Father and son divided the crowd between them without any apparent coordination, ensuring that as many people as possible would have the chance for a personal moment with a member of the royal family. It was a skill that William had learned through years of observation and practice, but seeing him apply it so effortlessly filled Catherine with pride. "Mummy, can we talk to the people too?" Charlotte asked, tugging gently on Catherine's coat. Catherine smiled down at her daughter, whose cheeks were already pink from the cold, but whose eyes were bright with excitement. "Of course, darling. But remember what we've practiced about being polite and taking turns." She guided the three children toward a section of the crowd where several families with children had gathered. Catherine had learned over the years that these interactions were often the most meaningful for both her family and the public. Children related naturally to other children, and seeing George, Charlotte, and Louis engage with their peers helped humanize the royal family in ways that formal speeches or ceremonies never could. "Hello, what's your name?" George asked a boy who appeared to be close to his own age, showing the natural confidence that Catherine was working to nurture while keeping it balanced with humility. "I'm James, Your Royal Highness," the boy replied, his voice barely audible above the wind, but his excitement unmistakable. "You don't have to call me that," George said with a shy smile. "Just George is fine. Are you very cold? We could ask if you can come inside for a bit." Catherine felt her heart swell with pride at her son's instinctive kindness. These were the moments that reminded her why all the protocol and preparation was worthwhile, when she could see her children developing into compassionate individuals who understood their privilege came with responsibility to others. Meanwhile, Charlotte had gravitated toward a group of elderly ladies who were cooing over her appearance and asking about her favorite subjects at school. Catherine listened with amusement as her daughter explained her current fascination with horses and her hopes to have her own pony someday. The women responded with stories of their own childhood dreams and horses they had known, creating an intergenerational connection that transcended social barriers. Lewis, true to his energetic nature, was most interested in a service dog that had accompanied one of the visitors. With Catherine's permission and the dog's handler's guidance, he carefully petted the animal while asking detailed questions about its training and duties. Catherine was pleased to see him showing both enthusiasm and respect for the working animal. As she moved through the crowd herself, Catherine encountered Mary Patterson, an elderly woman who had attended royal events for over 60 years. Mrs. Patterson was wrapped in multiple layers of wool coats and scarves, her hands shaking slightly from the cold, but her eyes were bright and alert. "Your Royal Highness," Mrs. Patterson said with a slight curtsy that Catherine quickly discouraged with a gentle touch on the woman's arm. "Mrs. Patterson, how wonderful to see you again," Catherine replied warmly. "I do hope you're staying warm enough in this terrible weather." "Oh, I wouldn't miss this for anything," Mrs. Patterson declared with fierce determination. "I've been coming to see the royal family since I was Charlotte's age. My grandmother brought me to see King George VI, and I've been to every event I could manage since then. A bit of cold never hurt anyone." Catherine was moved by the woman's dedication and the living history she represented. "That's remarkable. You've seen so many changes over the years." "Indeed I have, Your Highness. But some things never change: the importance of duty, service, and family. That's what your family represents to people like me. When times get difficult, we know we can count on the royal family to be there, to carry on, to show us how to persevere." The conversation was interrupted by the approach of a royal protection officer, who discreetly indicated that they should begin moving toward the cars. Catherine realized they had been outside for nearly 30 minutes, and while she was energized by the interactions with the public, she was also aware that King Charles needed to conserve his energy, especially in the harsh weather conditions. "I'm afraid we need to start making our way back," Catherine said to Mrs. Patterson with genuine regret. "But thank you so much for coming out today. Your support means more than you know. God bless you and your family, Your Highness," Mrs. Patterson replied, pressing a small bouquet of flowers into Catherine's hands. "These are from my garden. They're quite hardy, like us Norfolk folk." Catherine accepted the flowers gratefully, touched by the personal gesture. As she began gathering her children, she reflected on how these individual connections formed the foundation of the monarchy's relationship with the people. Each conversation, each smile, each moment of genuine interest helped to build and maintain the bonds of loyalty and affection that sustained the institution through changing times. William appeared at her side, having concluded his own series of conversations with well-wishers. "Ready to head back?" he asked, though Catherine could see he was as reluctant as she was to end these meaningful interactions. "Almost," she replied, noticing that King Charles was still deep in conversation with a group of local farmers who were updating him on agricultural conditions in the region. Despite the cold and his recent health concerns, he appeared genuinely engaged in learning about their challenges and concerns. George, Charlotte, and Lewis had said their goodbyes to their new acquaintances and were now huddled close to Catherine, seeking warmth against the increasingly bitter wind. The snow was falling more steadily now, and Catherine could see that some of the older members of the crowd were beginning to look uncomfortable despite their determination to remain. "Papa," William called out gently, "perhaps we should head back before the weather gets any worse." King Charles concluded his conversation with the farmers and began moving toward the waiting cars, but not before stopping to shake hands with several more well-wishers along the way. Catherine admired his dedication to these personal connections, even as she worried about him overtaxing himself in the harsh conditions. As they reached the cars, Catherine turned back to wave at the crowd one final time. The sight that greeted her was both inspiring and humbling. Hundreds of people standing in falling snow, many having waited for hours in freezing temperatures, all for the chance to see and connect with the royal family. Their faces were red from the cold, but their expressions remained joyful and appreciative. "Thank you all so much for coming," Catherine called out, her voice carrying across the churchyard. "Please get somewhere warm soon." The crowd responded with cheers and waves, many calling out messages of support and affection. Catherine felt overwhelmed by their loyalty and determination, and she made a mental note to ensure that the royal household would find ways to acknowledge and thank the local community for their continued support. Inside the warm car, the children immediately began sharing their experiences with each other, their voices overlapping with excitement as they described the people they had met and the conversations they had enjoyed. Catherine listened with pleasure, knowing that these interactions were an important part of their education in royal duty and public service. "Did you see how happy everyone was?" Charlotte asked. Even though it was so cold, they were all smiling. "That's because they care about our family and what we represent," William explained, echoing the conversation from earlier that morning. "When people see us working together and fulfilling our duties, it gives them confidence and hope." George nodded seriously. "Mrs. Henderson told me that seeing Grandpapa looking well made her feel better about everything. She said she was worried about him." Catherine exchanged a meaningful look with William. It was both touching and sobering to realize how personally the public took the royal family's health and well-being. Their appearance today had clearly served its intended purpose of reassuring people that King Charles was recovering and that the monarchy remained strong and stable. As they drove back towards Sandringham House, Catherine reflected on the morning's events. The church service had provided spiritual grounding and community connection, while the interaction with the public had reinforced the bonds between the royal family and the people they served. Despite the challenging weather conditions, the day had been a success in every meaningful way. King Charles's car was just ahead of theirs, and Catherine could see him through the rear window, apparently in animated conversation with his equerry. His energy and engagement throughout the morning had been remarkable, dispelling many of the concerns that had surrounded his recent health issues. "He looked really good today," William said, following her gaze. "Stronger than he seemed in weeks." "I think being around people energizes him," Catherine observed. "He genuinely loves these interactions with the public. It reminds him why he does this job." As they approached the main house, Catherine began to feel the exhaustion that always followed major public appearances. The constant awareness of being watched and photographed, the need to maintain perfect composure and appropriate responses, and the emotional energy required for genuine public engagement all took their toll, even during positive events like today's church service. But alongside the exhaustion was a deep sense of satisfaction and purpose. They had successfully presented a united, strong family image at a time when such unity was particularly important. They had honored the traditions that connected them to previous generations while also demonstrating their own authentic approach to royal duty. And they had shared meaningful moments with people whose loyalty and support formed the foundation of a monarchy's continued relevance in modern Britain. The cars pulled to a stop at the main entrance to Sandringham House, where hot tea and a warm lunch were waiting. As they stepped back into the welcoming interior, Catherine felt grateful for both the public service they had just completed and the private family time that lay ahead. The warmth of Sandringham House enveloped them like a gentle embrace as they stepped inside, the contrast from the bitter January wind outside, making the interior feel particularly welcoming. Catherine immediately noticed how the children's cheeks were still flushed from the cold, their eyes bright with the excitement of the morning's events. King Charles appeared invigorated rather than depleted by the public engagement, his step lighter and his smile more relaxed than it had been in recent weeks. "I think that went rather well," he said with evident satisfaction as they gathered in the drawing room, where a fire crackled warmly in the hearth. The turnout was remarkable considering the weather. "The British people never cease to amaze me with their dedication." Catherine settled into one of the comfortable armchairs, finally, allowing herself to fully relax after hours of public scrutiny. The formal posture and constant awareness of cameras and observers could be set aside now, replaced by the easier rhythm of family conversation. She watched as Louis immediately gravitated toward the fireplace, holding his small hands out to warm them while chattering about all the people he had met. "Grandpapa, why do so many people come to see us even when it's so cold?" Charlotte asked, curling up on a sofa beside her grandfather with the directness that only children possess. King Charles considered the question carefully, understanding that his answer would help shape his granddaughter's understanding of their role and responsibilities. "Well, my dear, I think it's because our family represents something important to them: tradition, continuity, and service. When they see us carrying out our duties, especially during difficult times, it reminds them that some things remain constant and reliable in a changing world." George, who had been listening intently, nodded with the seriousness he often displayed when discussing royal matters. "Like how Mrs. Patterson told Mama that she's been coming to see royal events for 60 years. She said it makes her feel connected to something bigger than herself." "Exactly right." King Charles beamed at his eldest grandson. "People like Mrs. Patterson understand that the monarchy isn't just about us as individuals. It's about what we represent collectively, the values we embody, and the continuity we provide across generations." William moved to stand by the window, looking out at the snow that was now falling more heavily across the estate grounds. Catherine could see him processing the morning's events, analyzing what had gone well, and what they might improve upon for future occasions. It was a habit she had observed in him for years, his constant effort to learn and refine his approach to public duty. "The media response will be interesting," he mused aloud. "I saw several photographers capture some really lovely moments with the children and the crowd." "Speaking of which," Catherine interjected gently, "we should probably check on what's being reported. The communications team will want to know our perspective on how things went." King Charles nodded, though he seemed reluctant to shift focus from the family gathering to the more clinical analysis that always followed public appearances. "Yes, of course. But first, let's have some lunch. All that time in the cold has made me quite hungry, and I suspect the children feel the same way." As if summoned by his words, the household staff appeared with the perfectly timed efficiency that characterized Sandringham's operations. Lunch was served in the smaller family dining room, a cozy space that felt more intimate than the grand formal dining areas used for state occasions. The menu had been thoughtfully planned to provide warming comfort food: hearty soup, fresh bread, roasted chicken with winter vegetables, and warm pudding for dessert. During the meal, conversation flowed naturally between reflections on the morning's events and lighter family topics. King Charles regaled the children with stories from his own childhood visits to Sandringham, painting pictures of Christmas celebrations and family traditions that had shaped his understanding of both duty and family bonds. Catherine loved these moments when he became simply a grandfather rather than a monarch, sharing personal memories and wisdom with the next generation. "Did you know," he told them, "that when I was Louis's age, I once got lost in the gardens here for 3 hours? My grandmother, the Queen Mother, was beside herself with worry. They finally found me in the greenhouse, having quite a serious conversation with the head gardener about roses." The children giggled at the image of their grandfather as a mischievous boy, and Catherine felt grateful for these humanizing stories that helped her children understand their family history in personal terms rather than just formal historical events. After lunch, while the children were settled with books and games in the library, Catherine found herself in King Charles's study with William for a more serious debriefing about the morning. The room reflected his personal interests, walls lined with books on architecture, environmental issues, and philosophy, alongside family photographs spanning decades of royal life. "How are you really feeling?" William asked his father with a concern that had become more pronounced since King Charles's health scare. "Better than I have in weeks," King Charles replied honestly. "There's something energizing about connecting with people, about fulfilling the role I've prepared for my entire life. The doctors were right that I needed to pace myself, but they were also right that complete isolation from public duties wouldn't serve anyone well." Catherine studied his face carefully, looking for signs of fatigue or strain, but finding only genuine vitality. The crowd's response was remarkable. Even the media seemed to focus on the positive energy rather than looking for any signs of weakness or concern. That's the power of authenticity, King Charles observed. People can sense when you're genuinely present and engaged versus when you're simply going through the motions. Today felt real and meaningful, which is what public service should be about. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the communications secretary with early reports from the media coverage. The initial responses were overwhelmingly positive, focusing on the family's unity, King Charles's apparent recovery, and the touching interactions between the royal children and the public. Several photographs had already been selected as particularly representative of the day's success. The image of Charlotte talking to Mrs. Henderson is going to be everywhere, the secretary reported. And there's a lovely shot of Louis with that service dog that's getting significant social media engagement. The overall narrative is exactly what we hoped for: strength, continuity, and connection with the people. Catherine felt a sense of relief and accomplishment wash over her. Public appearances always carried risks, particularly when King Charles's health was still a subject of public concern. But today had achieved all their objectives while also providing genuinely meaningful moments of connection and service. As the afternoon progressed, Catherine found herself reflecting on the deeper significance of the day's events. Beyond the immediate success of the church service and public engagement, the morning had demonstrated something important about the nature of modern monarchy. It wasn't enough to simply appear in public and fulfill ceremonial duties. The royal family needed to create authentic connections with people, to show genuine interest in their lives and concerns, and to embody the values of service and dedication that justified their privileged position. The children rejoined them in the drawing room as tea time approached, their energy somewhat depleted from the morning's excitement and the warmth of the house. Charlotte curled up in Catherine's lap while George and Louis sprawled on the carpet near the fire, the family settling into the comfortable rhythm that characterized their private time together. "Will we see those people again?" Louis asked, his young mind still processing the morning's encounters. "Some of them, probably," William replied. "Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Patterson are what we call royal regulars. They come to lots of our public events. But even when we don't see the same people again, we carry forward what we learned from meeting them." "What did you learn today?" Charlotte asked with genuine curiosity. Catherine considered the question carefully. "I learned that people's support for our family isn't conditional on perfect weather or comfortable circumstances. They come out because they believe in something larger than themselves, and they trust us to represent those values faithfully." King Charles nodded approvingly. "I learned that my recent health concerns, rather than diminishing people's support, may have actually strengthened their emotional connection to our family. They see us as human beings who face challenges, not just symbols on a pedestal." As the afternoon light began to fade and the snow continued to fall outside, Catherine felt a profound sense of contentment settle over her. The day had been challenging in many ways: the bitter cold, the public scrutiny, the pressure to present a perfect image of family unity and royal competence. But it had also been deeply rewarding, reminding her of why she had chosen to embrace this extraordinary life and the responsibilities that came with it. William moved to sit beside her, taking her hand in his warm grasp. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything today, but especially for the way you supported Papa and made the children feel comfortable with all the attention." "We're a team," Catherine replied simply. "All of us. And today proved that when we work together, we can handle whatever challenges come our way." King Charles, who had been quietly observing his family, smiled with evident pride and affection. "Your grandmother would have been very pleased with today," he said softly. "She always believed that the monarchy's strength came from its ability to adapt and remain relevant while honoring the traditions that connect us to previous generations." As they prepared to leave Sandringham and return to their own home, Catherine took one last look around the drawing room that had hosted so many significant family moments over the decades. The warmth and comfort of the space seemed to embody everything that was best about their family life. The balance between public duty and private affection, the respect for tradition combined with openness to change, and the unwavering commitment to service that defined their shared purpose. The drive back to Anmer Hall was quiet, with the children dozing in the back seat, exhausted from their exciting day. Catherine and William sat in comfortable silence, each processing the events of the morning in their own way. Outside the car windows, the Norfolk countryside was transforming under its blanket of snow, the familiar landscape taking on a magical quality in the failing light. "Do you think we made a difference today?" Catherine asked as they turned through the gates of their home. William considered her question seriously. "I think we reminded people that the royal family is still here, still committed to our duties, and still capable of providing the stability and continuity they expect from us. In times of uncertainty, that's not a small thing." As they helped the sleepy children from the car and into their warm home, Catherine felt grateful for the day's success and optimistic about the challenges that lay ahead. They had faced the bitter cold together and emerged stronger, their bonds as a family deepened by shared purpose and mutual support. Whatever the future might bring, she knew they would meet it with the same unity and determination they had shown today at St. Mary Magdalene Church. The evenings settled around them like a comfortable blanket as they gathered for a simple family dinner, the formal requirements of royal protocol set aside in favor of the simpler pleasures of home. And in that peaceful domesticity, Catherine found the perfect end to a day that had tested their resilience and confirmed their strength as individuals, as a family, and as servants of the crown.